Star Trek the original series didn't get a proper final episode, which isn't surprising given the historical context. It was the 1960s. TV was different back then. Special last episodes that brought closure to a long-running series weren't as common or as expected as they are today. Plus, Star Trek was not a long-running series. Its 3-year run on NBC was respectable, and it certainly had a dedicated following, but it was hardly an institution. So, no series finale for Star Trek. At least not on TV. A decade after being canceled on NBC, Star Trek found new life on the big screen, and in 1991, 22 years after the last new episode of Star Trek the original series was broadcast, Captain Kirk, Spock, Dr. McCoy, and the rest of the original crew got their series finale in the form of the film Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. And it was good. It was real good. It was so good that I'm about to spend the rest of this video telling you why The Undiscovered Country is actually Star Trek's best series finale. 1991. I was 11 years old. I didn't realize it at the time, because in case I didn't mention it, I was 11 years old. But Star Trek was in a transitional period. So was the rest of the world. And yeah, the world is kind of always in a transitional period. That's just how history and culture and society work. But 1991 was really a transitional period, okay? One of the most significant aspects of that transition was the dissolution of the Soviet Union, aka the USSR, which had existed for almost 70 years and had been the foremost enemy of the United States since the end of the Second World War. The end of the Soviet Union meant the end of the Cold War, we thought. And a dramatic geopolitical realignment. Longtime enemies were now our allies, we thought. Timely political allegories had always been an important part of Star Trek, so it was only fitting that for the final big screen adventure of the original crew, the producers of Star Trek VI decided to make a movie about just all of that. And it turned out to be even timelier than its creators could have imagined. Star Trek VI opened in theaters on December 6, 1991, and 20 days later, on December 26, the Supreme Soviet convened for the final time and voted to officially dissolve the USSR. Now, was that just a coincidence? Or did Star Trek actually end the Cold War? It was a coincidence, but still, pretty cool. The story of the fall of the Soviet Union is a long and complicated one, and this is not the proper forum for that story, and I am not the right person to tell that story because I don't actually know most of it, but I do know that one of the events which is often cited as a major contributing factor to the collapse of the USSR is the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, the aftermath of which exposed dangerous flaws in the Soviet system and the scope of which forced the government to adopt a more open policy toward its own citizens and with the rest of the world. In the opening scene of Star Trek VI, the Klingon Empire experiences its own Chernobyl when Praxis, a moon of the Klingon homeworld, suddenly explodes, throwing the entire future of Klingon society into serious question and, perhaps worst of all, causing Captain Sulu to spill his tea. I mean, literally, not in the gossipy way, which is a shame. Look at that grin. That's not the face of someone who doesn't have tea to spill. The explosion of Praxis is very bad news for the Klingons because, as Captain Sulu observes during that first scene, it's an important energy production facility for them. But it's bad news for another reason as well, which Spock explains to a meeting of Starfleet top brass as well as his Enterprise crewmates in the following scene. The destruction of Praxis, apparently the result of over-mining and inadequate safety measures, is an environmental catastrophe. The Klingons estimate that their homeworld only has enough oxygen to last another 50 years. As a result, the Klingon Empire is interested in ending its long-standing hostilities with the Federation, which, as Spock says, the Klingons can no longer afford. So, Chernobyl parallels abound, but there's a personal angle here too. Spock has been conducting informal negotiations with Klingon Chancellor Gorkin, and they have agreed that Gorkin will travel to Earth to meet with the President of the Federation and begin official diplomatic talks. The Enterprise, commanded by Captain Kirk, is to rendezvous with Gorkon's ship and escort it through Federation space. Kirk doesn't like that, though. For one thing, Spock came up with this plan without even talking to Kirk about it first. And for another thing, Kirk feels a certain kind of way about Klingons. He says to Spock, "Man, what are you doing? You know I hate Klingons." And Spock says, "Yeah, but, they're dying." And Kirk's like, I know they're dying. And we, for our part, should just, and stick with me on this, let them die. God, Spock, in 3 months our tour on the Enterprise is over. We were so close to ending our Starfleet careers without helping the Klingons. And now you're seriously going to ruin that? Yes? Oh, I hate it when you don't let me let people die. They all head to the Enterprise. Kirk meets Lieutenant Valeris, who is replacing Sulu at the helm since Sulu got promoted to captain of the Excelsior. She seems nice and trustworthy. They head out to meet Chancellor Gorkon's ship. On the way, Kirk records a captain's log to remind us that a big reason why he has a problem with Klingons is that he blames them for the death of his son David, who was murdered by a Klingon in Star Trek III. Is it fair to hate all Klingons because of that single act? No, it's not. But sometimes the heart wants what it wants. The Enterprise and Gorkon's ship, the Kronos 1, meet up, and Kirk begrudgingly invites Gorkon and his staff over for dinner. Gorkon's party beams over, and Kirk and the Enterprise crew meet Gorkon, who is basically Klingon Abraham Lincoln, Gorkon's daughter, Azit Burr, and Gorkon's chief of staff, General Chang, the best character ever. Chang introduces himself to Kirk, and right away he's got that sly smile and that twinkle in his eye that says, I cannot fucking wait to kill you. Dinner goes well, except for all the barely controlled mutual hostility. Gorkon and Chang quote Shakespeare. Gorkon says, you don't know Shakespeare until you've read him in the original Klingon, so that's fun. And then Chang says, we need breathing room. And Kirk's like, whatever you say, Hitler. And Chang's like, always the sign of a strong position when you compare your opponent to Hitler. And Kirk's like, oh, you're familiar with Hitler. And Chang's like, I just paraphrased him, didn't I? The Klingons go back to their ship, and it's late, so Kirk and his officers go to bed. Except for Spock, and Chekhov, and Uhura, and Valeris, who are apparently still on duty because they're all on the bridge at their stations when Spock pages Kirk to come look at some unexplained radiation he's detected. Kirk is tired and cranky and probably about to yell at the others for working unapproved overtime when suddenly a photon torpedo slams into Gorkon's ship. It looks like the Enterprise has fired on the Kronos 1. Then, while Uhura and Chekhov scramble to figure out what's going on, the Klingon ship takes another torpedo hit. Scotty, who is also apparently still on duty, calls in to confirm that, according to inventory, all their torpedoes are still right where they're supposed to be, so the Enterprise couldn't have fired. But that contradicts what Spock finds in the data banks, which indicate that the Enterprise has fired 2 torpedoes. So, what do you believe? The inventory or the data banks? It's like when you check the weather, and for temperature it says it's 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but it feels like it's 73. If it feels like it's 73, why not just tell me it's 73? Why else do you think I'm asking? I'm looking at an app on my phone. I'm not a meteorologist. I just want to know what it's like outside so I can decide if I want to go for a walk or not. Why is this so complicated? In all the confusion, 2 people in spacesuits beam over to the Klingon ship with phasers and magnetic boots. The torpedo hits have knocked out gravity on the Kronos 1. The spacesuits march through the ship, shooting Klingons on the way, blowing this one guy's arm off. They find Chancellor Gorkon floating around asking where General Chang is, and they shoot him. The spacesuits return to the transporter and beam away, along with a couple of globs of Klingon blood. After they're gone, gravity aboard the Kronos 1 is restored, and everything that's been floating falls right to the floor, including the blood, which splats all over everything and makes it look like the aftermath of the most hardcore game of paintball ever played. On the Enterprise, Chang pops up on the view screen, and he is not happy that, as far as he knows, the Enterprise has been shooting torpedoes at his ship. He says, now's when I kill you, but Kirk says, wait, no, we surrender. Chang's like, fine, and powers down his weapons. Kirk announces that he's beaming over to the Klingon ship to see if he can help, and Dr. McCoy volunteers to go with him. Kirk's like, "Don't let them kill me, okay, Spock? Especially since this whole situation is your fault." Spock's like, "Don't worry, I got you," and he slaps a carpet swatch on Kirk's shoulder as he gets on the elevator. Kirk and McCoy beam over to the Kronos 1. McCoy tries to save Gorkin's life, but amazingly, his climb on top of him and club him in the chest technique does not stop Gorkin from bleeding to death from the multiple serious wounds he sustained. Believing Kirk and McCoy were involved in the attack, General Chang orders them arrested, and before long, there they are in a Klingon court standing trial for the assassination of the Chancellor. Chang himself is the prosecuting attorney, and he accuses McCoy of being an incompetent drunk. And labels Kirk a reckless and insubordinate loose cannon with a deeply felt prejudice against Klingons. To establish Kirk's motive for killing Gorkin, Chang plays Kirk's log entry from earlier, the one where he says he can never forgive Klingons for the death of his son. The judge finds Kirk and McCoy guilty of assassinating Gorkin, but in a good faith gesture in light of the Federation-Klingon peace talks, which have been moved away from Earth to a neutral setting but are still very much happening, the death sentence is waived. Instead, Kirk and McCoy are sent to Rurapente, a penal asteroid that is the Klingon equivalent of Siberia, where prisoners are forced to work in mines and are kept from escaping by the bleak, frozen environment. While Kirk and McCoy are being packed off to the Gulag, Spock and the rest of the crew are back on the Enterprise trying to figure out who actually fired on the Kronos 1 and killed Chancellor Gorkin. Scotty continues to insist that it's not possible for the Enterprise to have fired since all torpedoes have now been visually accounted for. Spock, in one of my favorite lines in the movie, says that an ancestor of his maintained that once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. What that means for their current situation is very simple. If it's not possible that the Enterprise fired those torpedoes, someone else must have. Given the angle from which the torpedoes came, the ship that fired them must have been beneath the Enterprise and very close by. And since the Kronos 1 would have seen another ship under any other conditions, that ship must have been cloaked. With help from the rest of the gang, Spock deduces that Gorkin's ship was actually attacked by a Klingon bird of prey that has been modified somehow to allow it to fire its weapons while cloaked. It's a nice theory that accounts for what they know about the attack and the circumstances leading up to it, including that unexplained radiation Spock detected right before the first torpedo hit, but they need evidence. Spock reasons that whoever beamed aboard the Kronos 1 to kill Gorkin returned to the Enterprise and is still here, because someone had to alter the databanks to make it appear at first that the Enterprise had fired those 2 torpedoes. So, the crew begins a ship-wide search to find the magnetic boots worn on the Kronos 1 by the spacesuited assassins. Meanwhile, Kirk and McCoy are settling in at the prison camp on Rurapente. One night they're in their bunks, and Kirk's like, in retrospect, given the fact that my widely proclaimed hatred of Klingons has made us the perfect patsies for a conspiracy threatening to destroy galactic peace forever, I think it's possible I could have made some better choices. Just then, Martia, one of their new friends from the camp, shows up and says, "Hey, I know a way we can escape. Meet me tomorrow morning for mining duty and we'll get out of here." So, they meet her the next morning, and it turns out she's a shapeshifter. She uses her abilities to slip out of her chains and lead Kirk and McCoy through a tunnel and out into the snow, where she shapeshifts again into a big hairy creature. As they make their way across the snow, hiking to a point beyond the shield that surrounds the prison camp and prevents people from being beamed away, an exhausted McCoy collapses. Kirk pulls him to his feet and says, "Don't give up now, Bones. Before we left the Enterprise, Spock stuck a carpet swatch on my shoulder. It's still there. They'll be able to use that carpet swatch to track us. As soon as we get outside the transporter shield, the Enterprise will be able to pinpoint our location and fly into our rescue. It's lucky the Klingons let us wear our own clothes to prison." "I know, right?" They make it outside the shield and set up a campfire, and then Kirk thanks Martia for her help by punching her in the goddamn face. McCoy's like, "Why?" And Kirk explains, Martia didn't need their help for any of this. And she conveniently has warm winter clothes and a heat flare. Where would a prisoner get those? Kirk guesses this march through the snow has been a setup, and Marty confirms that he's right. She was offered a full pardon to lead them out of the camp so the guards could discover them and kill them while trying to escape. It's all part of the conspiracy that killed Chancellor Gorkin and is still working to disrupt the peace talks. Taking out Kirk and McCoy would tie up two troublesome loose ends. Marty is shapeshifts into a duplicate of Kirk, and they have a Star Trek fight until the prison warden and some guards show up. The warden vaporizes Martia and is about to tell Kirk who is behind the conspiracy under the classic "why not, you'll be dead soon anyway" rationale when the Enterprise arrives and beams Kirk and McCoy away. Kirk is annoyed he didn't get to hear what the warden was about to say, but after he warms up a bit, he tells Spock he has an idea how they can find out. Their searches of the Enterprise have uncovered the magnetic boots and the uniforms worn by the assassins, and then Kirk and Spock practically trip over the bodies of the assassins themselves as they make their way from the transporter room. McCoy concludes that they were killed by blasts from a phaser set to stun but fired at close range. Kirk pulls Spock aside. He has an idea who else aboard the ship might be involved. And who might that be? Valeris, of course. It's always the new one. Did you think it was going to be Chekhov? Chekhov wouldn't frame Captain Kirk for murder and have him sent off to a snow-covered stockade. Walter Koenig would definitely do that to William Shatner, but Chekhov would never do that to Captain Kirk. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy trick Valeris into revealing herself as one of the conspirators. She explains that from her point of view, she and the others have acted to save the Federation. The Klingons can't be trusted, she says. Look how they conspired with her and the others to assassinate their own chancellor, to sabotage the peace negotiations. Kirk wants to know who else is involved in this conspiracy, but Valeris ain't talking, so Spock mind melds with her really hard, and she gives up a few names. Starfleet Admiral Cartwright, General Chang, of course, Nonklus, the Romulan ambassador, and presumably a few others too who don't matter. Shit, the Romulan ambassador barely matters. He's in like one scene, and if you're not listening closely, you won't even catch his name. Valeris also says there's only one bird of prey that can fire while cloaked, but she doesn't know where the new location of the peace conference is. Kirk needs to get there ASAP. Fortunately, his old friend Captain Sulu knows. Kirk calls Sulu, who tells him the conference is at Camp Kittimer near the Romulan border. I told you Sulu had the tea! The Enterprise heads to Kittimer with Sulu on the way to lend a hand too, though the Excelsior is further away and may not get there in time. When the Enterprise reaches the Kittimer system, Chang hails them, taunting Kirk from the cloaked bird of prey. As he begins to attack the Enterprise, Chang tells Kirk that it's better this way. No peace in our time. Chang quotes Shakespeare and shoots at the Enterprise while Kirk and his crew try to figure out how to locate the invisible ship so they can fight back. Sulu shows up in the Excelsior, which is a help, but it's still hard to put up much of a defense when you're being shot at by an enemy you can't see. Spock points out that even cloaked, the bird of prey must be emitting some sort of exhaust. Uhura reminds Kirk that they're carrying equipment to catalog gaseous anomalies, which gives Spock an idea, and he and McCoy hurry down to the torpedo bay to modify a torpedo with some of that gas-detecting equipment. When it's ready, Kirk gives the order to fire, and the torpedo follows the exhaust trail all the way back to the bird of prey, landing dead on target, giving General Chang just enough time for one last to be or not to be, before blowing him to smithereens. The Enterprise and the Excelsior gang up on the bird of prey and destroy it. Then Kirk and Sulu and their respective crews beam down to the peace conference just in time to prevent the assassination and arrest the conspirators. Galactic peace is preserved, or as Kirk puts it after returning to the Enterprise, once again we've saved civilization as we know it, with McCoy adding, and the good news is, they're not going to prosecute. Captain Sulu calls in from the Excelsior to tell Kirk it was good to see him in action one more time and to wish him luck, and then Kirk records one last captain's log as the Enterprise sets off on its final cruise under his command. There's a lot more to why Star Trek VI is a great movie and specifically a great finale for the TOS era of the franchise, besides the fact that it's a Cold War allegory, but The Cold War allegory is a big part of it. The choice to use the final appearance of the entire original Star Trek cast to tell a story with a forward-looking, progressive, pertinent, overtly political message just feels right. It honors the legacy of Star Trek while also adding to that legacy in a very meaningful and satisfying way. Star Trek has always been fundamentally optimistic. A better future is possible, it tells us, if we can get beyond the ignorance, intolerance, selfishness, and provincialism that keep us from living in peace with one another and seriously addressing the problems we face. No threat is so dangerous that we cannot solve it by working together. No enemy is so implacable that they cannot someday become a friend. We see that depicted in Star Trek VI, when the ultimate enemy of the Federation, the Klingons, take their first steps away from being adversaries and toward being allies. It reflects the heart of Star Trek and also of that moment in time. The fall of the Soviet Union was the source of a lot of hope in the West. It had seemed impossible only a few years before, but then, in 1991, it really felt like Russia and the United States could get beyond the Cold War and put the past behind them and become allies. If the Federation and the Klingon Empire could do it, why couldn't we? We were a bit too optimistic back then, as it turns out. Things were looking good for a little while there, but, well, you know. Still, just because the allegory in Star Trek VI turned out to be inaccurate, that doesn't mean it was wrong. And, as Captain Kirk says, we haven't run out of history quite yet. One of the things that makes the story of Star Trek VI so powerful is that it isn't about two huge faceless states trying to reset their relationship after decades of conflict. It's about people, characters who live in this world, who are fighting for or against this new future, who are worried about what their world will look like when all of this is over. Foremost among those characters, Captain Kirk himself. When Chancellor Gorkin says goodnight to Kirk after their troubled dinner, he tells him, if there is to be a brave new world, our generation is going to have the hardest time living in it. Kirk knows Gorkin is right. He tells McCoy as much later in the film. While they're lying in their bunks on Rura Penthe, Kirk makes an extraordinary admission. He says to McCoy, some people are afraid of the future, of what might happen. I was terrified. Star Trek VI is as much about Kirk confronting and overcoming his own prejudice against Klingons as it is about the Federation and the Klingons trying to make peace. Both developments give the film a sense of closure, of completion. The Federation-Klingon conflict and Kirk's personal antipathy toward the Klingons both have their roots in the original series, so it's fitting that the final adventure of the TOS era of the franchise would, if not bring both to a resolution, at least point them in the direction of one. When Kirk tells Azatbur at the end of the film that people can be very frightened of change, he's speaking from experience. This is the same guy who told Spock they should let the Klingons die in his first scene. This is the same guy who, until very recently, was still blaming Klingons as a people for the killing of his son. In Star Trek VI, there are characters, heroes and villains, who are resistant to change and who support it. By the end of the film, Kirk has been both. He has moved from one position to the other, come to see how wrong he was to reflexively distrust Gorkin and his peace initiative, and realized how damaging that distrust was. The film reminds us of the great but often unwelcome truth that change is inevitable, and shows us that we have a choice. We can embrace change, become a part of it, make it something positive, or we can stubbornly resist it. But, as all Trekkies know, resistance is not a viable long-term strategy. But in reminding us of that truth, and in honoring the legacy of Star Trek the original series, and bringing the adventures of these characters to a satisfying conclusion, Star Trek VI never resorts to the sort of cheap, shallow, pandering fan service that is currently infecting popular sci-fi fantasy and superhero franchises like The Black Death, or COVID, if you prefer a more contemporary and inflammatory reference. I am routinely frustrated and honestly baffled when I see fans defending the sort of obvious lazy fan service found in, say, Season 3 of Star Trek Picard or some of the Disney Plus Star Wars series by saying things like, well, there's so much Star Trek, or there's so much Star Wars. How can you write a new story in those universes and not reference or tie in a bunch of stuff? By doing that thing you just said, writing a new story that doesn't reference or tie into a bunch of the old stuff? With Picard Season 3, because it, like Star Trek VI, was also structured as a farewell to its main characters, there was also the excuse of, well, it's the finale, so they had to have all those cameos and Easter eggs. They really had no choice. What else could they have done? Look, if you like that sort of fan service I'm talking about, where the characters are constantly making reference to stuff they did in old episodes or stuff that other people did in old episodes of other shows, and where the plot is contrived to get those characters to do literally the same things they did 30 years ago, and everyone talks and acts like they've been watching their own show instead of being people living in the world of that show, and consequently that world feels about that big. Obviously, I don't like that kind of storytelling, but if you do, good for you. Your tastes are certainly more compatible with the spirit of the age than mine. Like what you like. But please don't try to tell me that everything is full of fan service and nostalgia bait now because the people who make the shows have no choice. That's bullshit. The writers may have no choice because a producer or a studio executive is telling them they have to cram a bunch of fan service into their story, but it's still someone making a choice, not an inescapable necessity. Writers working in long-running franchises like Star Trek, writers writing final episodes of long-running series or farewells to beloved characters don't suddenly lose their ability to make stuff up. There's no rule that projects set in shared fictional universes or projects intended to be send-offs for legacy characters must be the dramatic equivalent of sitting next to your grandpa while he sentimentally flips through the family photo album. In fact, if there is to be a rule about it, the rule should be to absolutely not do that. And I can think of no evidence in my favor more compelling than Star Trek VI. How do you craft a fitting conclusion to a series without just cynically reprising its greatest hits? Like this! You tell a story that deals with themes that have been running through the series all along. Starfleet versus the Klingons, Kirk versus the Klingons, the Federation and the Klingon Empire as a metaphor for the United States and the Soviet Union, but you explore and develop those themes in new ways through a plot that we haven't seen verbatim before. You take your characters in new directions that make sense given what we've established about them previously, but that don't just have them going back over territory they've already covered. You can do this through action, by placing characters in positions where we've never seen them, depicting Sulu as having been promoted to the command of his own ship, for example, and you can do it through emotion, making Kirk's character arc about confronting his bigotry toward Klingons. You return to the classic idea of hostility between the Federation and the Klingons, the quintessential Star Trek conflict. But you don't just have them go to war with each other again, or have Kirk have to fight another Klingon commander who wants to kill him, or destroy the Federation, or return the Empire to glory, blah, blah, blah. You do something we haven't seen before. You have the Klingons, after all these decades of tension and aggression, finally reach out to make peace. And the conflict comes from the lack of trust and from entrenched interests on both sides acting to wreck the peace process and preserve the status quo. You introduce a new villain who evokes classic villains. General Chang is his own person. He has his own stuff. His erudition, his love of Shakespeare. We've never met him before. He is not an established character, nor is he obviously derivative of any specific established character, but he is also clearly part of the same creative lineage as characters like Kor, Koloth, and Kang from Star Trek the original series. His conflict with Kirk is new, but also feels like the culmination of the many Kirk versus Klingon conflicts we've seen through the years. You reprise classic tropes without doing direct callbacks or just repeating old lines and beats. In Star Trek VI, we get a climactic starship battle, where the Enterprise plays cat and mouse with the enemy ship, as in Star Trek II. But instead of both ships being in a nebula where they can't see each other, in Star Trek VI, Kirk's Enterprise is initially at the mercy of Chang's cloaked bird of prey. Once again, the battle is won for the Enterprise by Spock saving the day, but instead of making a selfless sacrifice, he, with the assistance of McCoy and a helpful suggestion from Uhura, finds a way to outsmart Chang. You include a scene between your two most important characters, Kirk and Spock, where, without making specific references to the events of past movies or TV episodes, they share their thoughts and feelings with one another, talk about their mistakes, their doubts, their worries that time has finally caught up with them, that their world is passing them by, where they support each other like old friends, comrades in arms, about to face their final test. We get a couple of scenes of Kirk engaging in hand-to-hand combat, reminiscent of many fights in the previous movies and TV episodes, but the film uses both fights to slyly comment on this particular trope. The first one, between Kirk and this big scary dude in the prison camp, ends with a joke, when Kirk kicks his opponent in what he thinks are the knees, but turn out to be the poor guy's genitals. And the second, between Kirk and shapeshifter Martia, becomes a brawl between two Kirks. Surely the apotheosis of the Star Trek fight. Neither fight features even a hint of the instantly recognizable Star Trek fight theme, by the way. You know, the one from Amok Time. Da 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 da. The score for Star Trek VI, composed by Cliff Idleman, is almost entirely original, utilizing the classic Alexander Courage Trek theme only twice. And it's brilliant, among the best of all the Star Trek film scores, in no small part because of that originality. Like the writers of Star Trek VI and the director, Nicholas Meyer, Idleman gives us new music we haven't heard before, that fits within the established tradition, but that enlarges that tradition rather than simply repeating what's already there. Actually, of the 6 movies based on Star Trek the original series, only 2, Star Trek III and Star Trek V, have musical scores that prominently reuse themes from previous films. And in both of those, it's a composer reprising themes they wrote themselves. James Horner in Star Trek III reusing themes he wrote for Star Trek II, and Jerry Goldsmith in Star Trek V reusing themes he wrote for Star Trek the Motion Picture. And the scores for all 6 original series films use the Alexander Courage main title theme from the TV series extremely sparingly. Good thing no one told those composers to build their scores around old familiar themes, because that's what the fans were expecting, huh? My point isn't that Star Trek VI is completely separate from the other films in its series or the rest of the franchise. It's not. It's a Star Trek movie through and through, with all the Star Trek stuff a Star Trek fan would expect. Captain Kirk, Spock, and the rest, the Enterprise, Klingons. There's even one tiny little "hey, look who it is" cameo from Michael Dorn as Kirk and McCoy's defense attorney, Colonel Worf, who is apparently an ancestor of Worf from Star Trek The Next Generation. But the creators of Star Trek VI, first and foremost Nicholas Meyer, the greatest of all Star Trek film directors, and it's not close, sorry Space Dad, the creators of Star Trek VI treat Star Trek like a story, not a toy box. Looking back over its entire history, Star Trek has had some truly excellent series finales. On the TV side, which is most of the franchise, the title at the top of my list is All Good Things, the finale of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's the best final episode of a Star Trek TV series. It's one of the best final episodes of any TV series. And if there's any finale in the franchise that gives Star Trek VI a run for its money, All Good Things is it. The last episode of Deep Space Nine, What You Leave Behind, is solid also. It wraps up the show's ongoing storylines well and concludes on an exquisitely sad note, with most of the main cast departing the station in various directions, while Jake Sisko remains waiting for his father to return from his time among the prophets. What You Leave Behind is good, sometimes great, but Thematically speaking, its scope is fairly narrow, and Deep Space Nine produced many far superior episodes over the years. All Good Things, on the other hand, is not only a great last episode, it's among the best TNG episodes, period. It also feels like more than a conclusion. It feels like a capstone, like a summation of everything that makes TNG TNG. Star Trek VI has a similar quality. It doesn't just inform us of what happened right before Captain Kirk and the classic Enterprise crew retired and the ship was mothballed. It tells a story that reminds us, or reminds me at least, of why these characters and their adventures are so compelling to begin with. That is not the case with the other Trek TV series that got proper final episodes. Endgame, the finale of Star Trek Voyager, overreaches with a needlessly complicated time travel plot that throws the crew into yet another conflict with the Borg, who as antagonists have been beaten to death and then some by this point. And These Are the Voyages, the last episode of Enterprise, remains one of the most bewildering miscalculations in the history of the franchise, as the final adventure of Captain Archer and the crew of the NX-01 Enterprise is framed as a holodeck program being played by Commander Riker during the events of the Pegasus from the 7th season of TNG. It's been almost 20 years, and I've watched this episode a bunch of times, and my reaction is still, what? And if you want to know my thoughts on the final season of Star Trek Picard, if you don't know already and you don't feel like hazarding a guess based on what I've said here, I've talked about that a bunch elsewhere. Jason Harding and I did individual episode reviews, and I recently did a video essay about the season as well, but the short version is, I think it's the shits. The only other Star Trek finale I haven't mentioned yet is Star Trek Nemesis, the last of the films to feature the TNG crew, and I think it's the shits too. The worst of all the Star Trek movies by far, but somehow not nearly as bad as Picard Season 3, which in turn isn't nearly as bad as Picard Season 2, which isn't relevant to the subject here, so I'm just mentioning it in passing. To sum up, despite some stiff competition from All Good Things, for my money, Star Trek VI is the best series finale in all of Star Trek, and that is because of all the things Star Trek VI is and is not. It is not an Easter egg hunt. It is not a shamelessly contrived excuse for a parade of cameos and callbacks. It is not a victory lap that sentimentally revisits past glories. It is not a creatively bankrupt revival of classic moments. What it is a damn good movie in its own right. A well-plotted, tightly directed sci-fi action-adventure with solid performances and a strong political message that was uncannily timely upon its release and which remains relevant today. What it is an example of Star Trek at its best that exhibits all the qualities that make Star Trek compelling and entertaining. What it is a fitting conclusion to its era of the franchise that lets our classic heroes have a final adventure which honors their legacy while also adding to that legacy. What it is a farewell story that still has new things to show us, that takes characters who, by 1991, had been around for 25 years, pushes them to places we've never seen them go, and enables them to end their journey with grace and hope and resolution, looking ahead, not behind, moving forward, not backward. In the film's final moments, Uhura turns to Kirk to inform him that they've been recalled to space dock so that the Enterprise can be decommissioned. Their voyages have come to an end. The adventure is over. As Kirk contemplates this, Spock speaks up. "If I were human," he says, "I believe my response would be, go to hell." Chekhov looks to Kirk and asks for a course heading. Kirk sits down in his captain's chair, smiles wistfully, and calls out, "Second star to the right," and straight on till morning. Then we watch the Enterprise sail toward a nearby star and fade away as the light from the star brightens to fill the screen. Illogical, poetic, just corny enough. It leaves you wanting more. Not because the conclusion was unsatisfying, not because what you just watched was lacking, but because you loved it so much, and you, like Captain Kirk, Wish it could last forever. I don't see how you can ask for a better ending than that. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shout-outs to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Kenneth Haller, thanks Kenneth. Baby E.T., thanks Baby E.T. Michael Blank, thanks Michael. Colin Donnell, thanks Colin. Ryan Edwards, thanks Ryan. Bridget G. Collins, thanks Bridget. Tofu Dunk, thanks Tofu Dunk. Samuel Umschneider, thanks Samuel. Next, new channel members. There's only one this month that qualifies for a shout out, and they are Carrie B. Thanks, Carrie. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video, or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, to next month's Regulation Trek Actually topic. For that one, we turn our attention once again to a specific character in the Star Trek pantheon. And given how long I've been doing these Trek Actually videos and how many of them I've produced, it's kind of surprising I haven't devoted an entire video to this character yet. Well, that all changes next month when we take a deep dive into the mascot of the entire damn franchise with a video titled Why Spock is Actually the Most Important Character in Star Trek. Can't wait for that one. That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then, so until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching and take care, everybody.